Hey guys, in this month's Historical Fiction 101, I'm going to be sharing with you some recommendations for historical fiction that's going to be released from January to June of 2024. So, as I always do with these videos, I have 20 books that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. These are all books that are going to be released somewhere between January and June of 2024. I'm going to be looking over here at Goodreads, so now is your time to pull up your own Goodreads, and if any of these books sound like your cup of tea, add them while I read them. First up, Unsinkable by Jenny L. Walsh. Violet is a stewardess and wartime nurse who not only survives a shipwreck, but also two sinkings, one on the infamous Titanic. No one can understand why she would return to sea, but Violet is simply trying to survive. Her childhood was fraught with illness and death in her family. Her distraught mother is too ill to work, that responsibility falling to Violet as the oldest of 9. When the world enters the Great War, she becomes a nurse, helping men who could very well be her brothers. But disaster strikes again, this time as the Britannic strikes a mine. Miraculously, Violet survives, but her obligation to her mother and siblings still remains, leaving Violet to wonder if she'll ever be able to put her tumultuous life at sea behind her and pursue a life and love all her own. Next up, The Curse of Pietro Houdini by Derek B. Miller. August 1943. 14-year-old Massimo is all alone, newly orphaned and fleeing from Rome after surviving the American bombing raid that killed his parents. Massimo is attacked by thugs and finds himself bloodied at the base of the Monte Cassino. It is there, in the Benedictine Abbey's shadow, that a charismatic and cryptic man calling himself Pietro Houdini, the self-proclaimed master artist and confidant of the Vatican, rescues Massimo and brings him up the mountain to serve as his assistant in preserving the treasures that lay within the monastery walls. But can Massimo believe what Pietro is saying, particularly when Massimo has secrets too? Who is this extraordinary man? When it becomes evident that Monte Cassino will soon become the front line in the war, Pietro Houdini and Massimo execute a plan to smuggle 3 priceless Titian paintings to safety down the mountain. They are joined by a nurse concealing a nefarious past, a cafe owner turned murderer, a wounded but chipper German soldier, and a pair of lovers along with their injured mule, Ferrari. Together, they will lie, cheat, steal, fight, kill, and sin their way through battlefields to survive, all while smuggling the Renaissance's masterpieces and the bag full of ancient Greek gold they have rescued from the safekeeping of the Germans. Next up, Finding Margaret Fuller by Alison Pataki. Massachusetts, 1836. Young, brazen, beautiful, and unapologetically brilliant, Margaret Fuller expects an invitation from Ralph Waldo Emerson, the celebrated Sage of Concord, to meet his coterie of enlightened friends, shaping a nation in the throes of its own self-discovery. By the end of her stay, she will become the radiant genius and fiery heart, one of the transcendentalists, a role model to young Louisa May Alcott, an inspiration to Nathaniel Hawthorne and his scandalous Scarlet Letter, a friend to Henry David Thoreau as he ventures into the woods of Walden Pond, and a muse to Emerson himself. But Margaret craves more than poetry and interpersonal drama, and she finds her restless soul in need of new challenges and adventures. Next up, King Nix by Kristen Bacchus. Set in November 1918, on the opulent castle-like island estate of an eccentric millionaire, Claude Arkell, this atmospheric, compellingly readable novel reimagines the life of Anna Fillingfort, whose husband, Charles Hoy Fort, was the most famous anomalist of the early 20th century. Settling in as a guest on Prosper Island, the young couple find themselves quarantined in a shabby outpost far from Mr. Arkell's mansion, from which they learn 3 girls have gone missing. After she encounters a figure in the woods that may be the ghost of her long-lost friend, Mary, Anna resolves to find out who Mr. Arkell really is, and what has become of the missing girls. Next up, The Ladies Rewrite the Rules by Suzanne Allen. Diana Boyle, a wealthy young widow, has no desire to ever marry again, particularly not to someone who merely wants her for her fortune. So when she discovers that she's Listed in a directory of rich single women, she is furious, and rightly so. She confronts Maxwell Dean, the man who published the Bachelor's Directory, and is horrified to find he is far more attractive than his actions have led her to expect. However, Diana is unmoved by Max's explanation that he authored the list to assist younger sons like himself who cannot afford to marry unless it's to a woman of means. So she gathers the ladies in the directory together to inform them of its existence, so they may circumvent fortune hunters' efforts to trick them into marriage. Though outraged, the women decide to embrace their unique position of power and reverse the usual gender roles by making the men dance to their tune, and together the ladies rewrite the rules. Next up, The Phoenix Bride by Natasha Siegel. The year 1666. It is a year after plague has devastated England. Young widow Cecilia Thorogood is a prisoner, trapped and isolated within the cavernous London townhouse of her older sister, at the mercy of a legion of doctors who fail to cure her grief with their impatient scalpels. Cecilia shows no sign of improvement. Soon her sister makes a decision, and she hires a new physician, someone known for more unusual methods, but he is a foreigner, and despite his attempts to save Cecilia, he knows he cannot quell the storm of grief that rages within her. There is no easy cure for melancholy. David Mendez fled Portugal to flee a new life in London, where he could practice his faith openly and leave the past behind. Still reeling from the loss of his beloved friends, struggling with his religion and his past, David finds himself in this foreign land, free and safe, but incapable of happiness, caring not even for himself, but only for his ailing father. The security he has found in London threatens to disappear when he meets Cecilia, and he finds himself torn between his duty to medicine and the beating of his own heart. He is the only one who can see her pain. The glimmers of light she emits, even in her gloom, are enough to make him believe once more in love. Next up, The Princess of Las Vegas by Chris Bahajilan. I still cannot figure out how to pronounce this man's name for the life of me. Good God. Okay. Chrissy Dowling has created a world that suits her perfectly. She passes her days by the pool in a private cabana. She splurges on ice cream but never gains an ounce. And each evening she transforms into a princess, performing her musical cabaret inspired by the life of the late Diana Spencer. Some might find her strange or even delusional, an American speaking with a British accent, hair feathered into a style 30 years old, living and working in a casino that has become a dated trash heap. On top of that, Chrissy's daily diet of Adderall and Valium, good God, leaves her more than a little tipsy. Her senator boyfriend has gone back to his wife, and her entire career rests on resembling a dead woman. And yet, fans see her for the gifted chameleon she is, showering her with gifts, letters, and standing ovations night after night. But when Chrissy's sister Betsy arrives in town with a new boyfriend and a teenage daughter, and when Richie Morley, the owner of the Buckingham Palace Casino, is savagely murdered, Chrissy's carefully constructed kingdom comes crashing down all around her. A riveting tale of identity, obsession, and high-tech mobsters. This is an addictive, wildly original thriller. Ooh, yeah, seriously, this sounds so good. Next up, What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. And this is actually book 2 in this series, and it follows T. Kingfisher's What Moves the Dead. Totally was not anticipating a sequel to that book, but I'm totally here for it. Retired soldier Alex Easton returns in a horrifying new adventure. After their terrifying ordeal at the Usher Manor, Alex Easton feels as if they just survived another war. All they crave is rest, routine, and sunshine, but instead, as a favor to Angus and Miss Potter, they find themselves heading to their family hunting lodge deep in the cold, damp forests of their home country, Galicia. In theory, one can find relaxation in even the coldest and dampest of Galician autumns, but when Easton arrives, they find the caretaker dead, the lodge in disarray, and the grounds troubled by a strange, uncanny silence. The villagers whisper that a breath-stealing monster from folklore has taken up residence in Easton's home. Easton knows better than to put too much stock in local superstitions, but they can tell that something is not quite right in their home or in their dreams. Next up, The Phoenix Crown by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. Versailles, 1912. At the height of an intoxicating Paris summer, a mysterious American millionaire attends a sumptuous costume ball with his bride, on whom he has bestowed the legendary Phoenix Crown, a priceless relic of Beijing's fallen summer palace. The party of the century kicks off with 300 guests, 900 bottles of champagne, and one quest for justice that spans 2 continents and 6 years. San Francisco, 1906. In a bustling city of newly minted millionaires and hopeful upstarts, four very different women cross paths: a resourceful Chinatown embroideress desperately searching for her lost love, a silver-voiced soprano who performs alongside Enrico Caruso, a mysteriously disappeared artist, and an independent female botanist obsessed with collecting a rare flower that only blooms at night. One man seemingly holds the key to their questions: Henry Thornton, the charming railroad magnate whose extraordinary collection of Chinese antiques includes the Phoenix crown. Next up, Where They Lie by Claire Conlon. Dublin, 1943. Actress Julia Bridges disappears. She was last seen entering the house of Gloria Fitzpatrick, who is later put on trial for the murder of a woman whose abortion she facilitated. But it's never proved that Gloria had a hand in Julia's death, and Julia's body has never been found. Gloria, however, is sentenced to a life in an institution for the criminally insane, where she's found dead a few years later from an apparent suicide, and the truth of what happened to Julia Bridges dies with her. Until, in Dublin again in 1968 now, Nicoletta Sardo is an ambitious junior reporter for the Irish Sentinel when the bones of Julia Bridges are discovered in the garden of a house on the outskirts of the city. Drawn into investigating the 25-year-old mystery of Julia's disappearance and her link to the notorious Gloria Fitzpatrick, Nicoletta becomes immersed in the tangled underworld of the illegal abortion industry, stirring up long-buried secrets from her own past. Next up, The Fox Wife by Yang Zichu. Manchuria, 1908. A young woman is found frozen in the snow. Her death is clouded by rumors of foxes involved, which are believed to lure people by transforming themselves into beautiful women and men. Bao, a detective with a reputation for sniffing out the truth, is hired to uncover the dead woman's identity. Since childhood, Bao has been intrigued by the fox gods, yet they have remained tantalizingly out of reach until perhaps now. Meanwhile, a family that owns a famous Chinese medicine shop can cure ailments, but not the curse that afflicts them. Their eldest sons die before their 24th birthdays. Now, the only grandson of the family is 23. When a mysterious woman enters their household, their luck seems to change. Or does it? Is their new servant a simple young woman from the north, or a fox spirit bent on her own revenge? Next up, The Familiar by Lee Bardugo. In a shabby house on a shabby street in the new city of Madrid, Luisa Catado uses scraps of magic to get through her days of endless toil as a scullion. But when her scheming mistress discovers the lump of a servant cowering in the kitchen is actually holding a talent for little miracles, she demands Luisa use those gifts to better the family's social position. What begins as simple amusement for the bored nobility takes a perilous turn when Luisa garners the notice of Antonio Perez, the disgraced secretary to Spain's king. Still reeling from the defeat of his armada, the king is desperate for any advantage in the war against England's heretic queen, and Perez will stop at nothing to regain the king's favor. Determined to seize this one chance to better her fortunes, Luisa plunges into a world of seers and alchemists, holy men and hucksters, where the line between magic, science, and fraud is never certain. But as her notoriety grows, so does the danger that her Jewish blood will doom her to the Inquisition's wrath. She will have to use every bit of her wit and will to survive, even if that means enlisting the help of Aguillan Santiago, an embittered immortal familiar whose own secrets could prove deadly for them both. Next up, Medea by Eilish Quinn. Among the women of Greek mythology, the witch Medea may be the most despised, known for the brutal act of killing her own children to exact vengeance on her deceitful husband, the Argonauts' leader Jason. Medea has carved out a singularly infamous niche in our histories, but what if that isn't the full story? The daughter of a sea nymph and the granddaughter of a titan, Medea is a paradox. She is at once rendered compelling by virtue of the divinity that flows through her bloodline and made powerless by the fact of her being a woman. As a child, she intuitively submerges herself in witchcraft and sorcery, but soon finds it may not be a match for the prophecies that hang over her entire family like a shroud. As Medea comes into her own as a woman and a witch, she also faces the arrival of the hero Jason, preordained by the gods to be not only her husband but also her lifeline to escape her isolated existence. Medea travels the treacherous seas with the Argonauts, battles demons she has never conceived of, and falls in love with the man who may ultimately be her downfall. Next up, Diva by Daisy Goodwin. In the glittering and ruthlessly competitive world of opera, Maria Callas was known simply as La Divina, the Divine One. With her glorious voice, instinctive flair for the dramatic, and striking beauty, she was the toast of the grandest opera houses in the world. But her fame was hard won. Raised in Nazi-occupied Greece by a mother who mercilessly exploited her golden voice, she learned early in life to protect herself from those who would use her for their own ends. When she met the fabulously rich Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis for the first time in her life, she believed she found someone who saw the woman within the legendary soprano. She fell desperately in love. He introduced her to a life of unbelievable luxury, showering her with jewels and sojourns in the most fashionable international watering holes with celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. And then suddenly it was over. The international press announced that Aristotle Onassis would marry the most famous woman in the world, former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, leaving Maria to pick up the pieces. Next up, Every Time We Say Goodbye by Natalie Jeter. This does say it's part of the Jane Austen Society series, but I think you can totally just read these books as standalones. And I think it even says here it can be read as a standalone. A surprise phone call from her late fiance's family sends Vivian Lowry of Bloomsbury Girls off on her next adventure. Struggling as a playwright, she moves to Italy both to reckon with her past and create a new future as a scriptwriter at the I can't pronounce it. A studio. It's a studio in Rome. Here she encounters the greatest male bastion of them all, the Vatican, and ends up entangled with the church and the censors while romantically caught between two men, an enigmatic American film financier with an estranged movie star wife and a socialist Italian prince and independent filmmaker under house arrest over a censored screenplay. Next up, We Are Only Ghosts by Jeffrey L. Richards. New York City, 1968. The customers at Cafe Marie don't come just for the excellent coffee and pastries. They come for the sophisticated ambiance and the illusion of being somewhere other than a bustling, exhausting city. Head waiter Charles Ward helps create that illusion through impeccable service, unobtrusive, nearly invisible, yet always watchful. It's a skill Charles honed as a young Jewish boy in war-torn Europe, when avoiding attention might mean the difference between life and death. But even then, one man saw him all too clearly, a Nazi officer who was both his savior and tormentor. At 17, Charles was deported to Auschwitz with his family. There he was singled out by Obersturmführer Berthold Verden, who hid him in his home. Their entanglement produced a tortured affection mixed with hatred that flares to life again decades later when Berthold walks into Cafe Marie. Drawn back into Berthold's orbit, Charles is forced to revisit the pain and the brief, undeniable pleasures of the life he once knew. And if he acts on his growing hunger for revenge, will he lose his only tether to the past, the only other witness to who he was and everything he endured, or find peace at last? Next up, The Titanic Survivors Book Club by Timothy Shaffert. For weeks after the sinking of the Titanic, York spots his own name among the list of those lost at sea. As an apprentice librarian for the White Star Line, his job was to curate the ship's second-class library. But just as he was about to board to tend to his library throughout the passage, a superior takes his place, leaving York stranded at the dock. The Titanic was not York's first brush with death, but as with every near miss, he manages to escape into the world of books. After he learns of the ship's sinking, he takes this twist of fate as a sign to follow his lifelong dream of owning a bookshop in Paris. It's at his shop that he receives an invitation to a secret society of survivors, where he encounters other ticket holders who didn't board the ship. Haunted by their good fortune, they decide to transform their group into a book society where they can grapple with their own anxieties through the guise of discussing contentious works such as The Awakening or The Picture of Dorian Gray. Of the ragtag group of survivors, York finds himself particularly drawn to the wealthy candy heiress, Xenia, and the mysterious and alluring Hayes. York feels like an outsider, looking in, falling hopelessly for Hayes, as Hayes courts Xenia. A tangled triangle of love and friendship forms between them, yet with the Great War looming, their close-knit group is shattered, only brought back together once the death of a fellow book club member leaves them wondering what fate has in store for each of them. Next up, Neferura by Melania Evans. Neferura I think is how that's pronounced, Neferyura, princess and high priestess of Kemet, knows her duty is to her people. When your mother is the great pharaoh, it is hard to forget, but Neferyura's unique position at court comes with high stakes for her country, especially when she's forced to serve her vile half-brother, a man determined to stop Neferyura's potential rise. Peace, it seems, never lasts for women who wield power in the open, especially when they cross a vengeful man. When Neferyura overhears Tutmosis' plot to end her mother's rule, she knows he must be stopped, no matter the cost. The discovery of a mysterious tattooed wise woman and her shadowy network of spies offers an uneasy alliance, but the wise woman wields more power than Neferyura knew possible. Power with the potential to rival her own. Neferyura must decide where her loyalties lie and how much she's willing to sacrifice to protect the people she loves before anything crumbles at the hands of a tyrant. Next up, The House on Biscayne Bay by Chanel Cleaton. With the Great War finally behind them, thousands of civilians and business moguls alike flock to South Florida with their sights set on making a fortune. When wealthy industrialist Robert Barnes and his wife Anna build Merbrisa, a glamorous estate on Biscayne Bay, they become the toast of the newly burgeoning society. Anna and Robert appear to have it all, but in a town like Miami, appearances can be deceiving, and one scandal can change everything. Years later, following the tragic death of her parents in Havana, Carmen Acosta journeys to Merbrisa, the grand home of her estranged older sister Carolina and her husband Asher Wyatt. On the surface, the gilded estate looks like paradise, but Carmen quickly learns that nothing at Merbrisa is as it seems. The house has a treacherous legacy, and Carmen's own life is soon in jeopardy, unless she can unravel the secrets buried beneath the mansion's facade and stop history from repeating itself. And, you guys, as I am slowly losing light here, I'm trying to get through this video as fast as possible, my last recommendation here is The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. Malaya, 1945. Cicely's family is in terrible danger. Her 15-year-old son, Abel, has disappeared, and her youngest daughter, Jasmine, is confined in a basement to prevent being pressed into service at the comfort stations. Her eldest daughter, Jujubee, who works at a tea house frequented by drunk Japanese soldiers, becomes angrier by the day. Cicely knows two things: that this is all her fault, and that her family must never learn the truth. A decade prior, Cicely had been desperate to be more than a housewife to a low-level bureaucrat in British colonized Malaya. A chance meeting with the charismatic General Fujiwara lured her into a life of espionage, pursuing dreams of an Asia for Asians. Instead, Cicely helped usher in an even more brutal occupation by the Japanese. 10 years later, as the war reaches its apex, her actions have caught up with her. Now her family is on the brink of destruction, and she will do anything to save them. And it says, spanning years of pain and triumph, told from the perspective of 4 unforgettable characters. This is a dazzling saga about the horrors of war, the fraught relationships between the colonized and their oppressors, and the ambiguity of right and wrong when survival is at stake. So you guys, that is it for all my recommendations for upcoming historical fiction in this year of 2024. Like I said, I am losing light. Let's get this video out of the way. So you guys, any of these books, do they sound appealing, intriguing to you? Or maybe I've left out some books that you have heard about. Give me some recommendations. I would definitely love to check them out. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.